Power doesn't make people stay, someone once said. It only makes them obey. Victoria Hale never believed that. Not once in her 36 years of building an empire that stretched across glass towers and silent boardrooms where decisions were signed in ink and carried out without question. She believed in control, in precision, in outcomes measured in quarterly reports and net margins. That morning, the skyline of Manhattan reflected clean and sharp across the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, a perfect mirror of the world she had constructed, untouchable, structured, hers. The conference room was quiet except for the soft slide of paper against polished wood. 12 executives sat around the table, waiting. No one spoke unless she did. No one moved unless she signaled it. Victoria glanced once at the final page, her pen hovering just above the signature line. Hundreds of jobs depended on that stroke. Entire families would feel it before the week was over. She didn't hesitate. She signed. Clean. Efficient. Final. The sound of the pen tapping the table echoed louder than it should have. Execute immediately, she said, voice level, already moving on. Around her, heads nodded. Laptops closed. Chairs shifted. The machine moved because she willed it to move. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, nothing did unless she allowed it. 40 minutes later, the building felt different. Less controlled. Not visibly. Everything still gleamed, every surface polished, every employee moving with quiet purpose. But something beneath it had shifted, like a note just slightly out of tune. Victoria stepped into the elevator alone, heels steady against marble, eyes fixed forward. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already handled. The doors opened to the underground parking level, cooler, dimmer, stripped of the illusion that lived upstairs. Concrete instead of glass. Fluorescent light instead of sunlight. Real, in a way the boardroom never was. She walked without slowing, keys already in hand, when she noticed him, not because he made a sound, but because he didn't. A man stood near the far wall beside a maintenance cart, one hand resting lightly on the handle as if he had paused mid-task and simply stayed there. He wasn't looking at her, not avoiding her either, just present, still. His jacket was worn at the edges, clean but lived in. His posture straight, not rigid. There was no rush in him, no quiet scramble to appear busy. He existed in the space like it belonged to him as much as it did to anyone else. Victoria slowed, just slightly. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't something she would have admitted. But it happened. Most people in this building moved differently when she entered a room. Conversations tightened. Shoulders adjusted. Eyes flickered with recognition or caution or calculation. This man did none of that. He simply reached down, picked up a small, scuffed lunch bag from the cart, and checked the zipper like it mattered. Like something inside it was worth protecting. Then, almost as an afterthought, he glanced up. Their eyes met. No flinch. No performance. Just a calm acknowledgement, like seeing another person was enough. Morning, he said. Quiet. Unforced. Victoria didn't respond immediately. It wasn't rudeness. It was unfamiliarity. People didn't speak to her like that. Not without angle. Not without purpose. His voice carried no request, no fear, no attempt to impress. Just presence. She gave a short nod and kept walking, heels clicking a fraction louder now, though she couldn't have said why. Behind her, she heard the faint roll of the cart begin again, steady and unhurried, as if nothing significant had happened. But something had. She felt it in the space between one step and the next. In the silence that followed her all the way to her car. Victoria Hale had built her world on power. And for the first time in a long while, she had just walked past someone who didn't seem to need it. The rest of the day moved the way her days always did, precise and uninterrupted, meetings stacked back to back, voices filtered through polished language and careful intention, every word measured, every outcome expected, and yet something lingered beneath it, something she could not file away or reduce into a clean decision, because it did not belong to her system of control. It did not follow rules. It did not respond to authority. It simply existed, quiet and steady, like the man in the parking level who had said one word and returned to his work as if her presence carried no more weight than anyone else's, and that absence of reaction stayed with her longer than any challenge ever had. By late afternoon, the building hummed with its usual rhythm, assistants moving quickly, phones lighting up. the quiet urgency of a company that never truly paused, and Victoria stood near the glass corridor overlooking the main lobby, reviewing a report she had already memorized, when a small disruption caught her attention not because it was loud, but because it was out of place. A young intern near the reception desk fumbling with a stack of files that slipped from her hands, paper scattering across the marble floor in a loose, uneven spread. The kind of mistake that usually earned a sharp glance or a clipped reminder about standards, and several people noticed but kept walking. Eyes forward, schedules too full to absorb someone else's moment of failure. Victoria did not move. She simply watched, because that was what she did. She observed, assessed, decided if something required intervention or if it would resolve itself within the structure she had built. And then she saw him again. The same man from the parking level, appearing at the edge of the scene without urgency, without hesitation. He did not look around to see who was watching, did not adjust his pace to signal importance. He simply stepped forward and crouched down beside the scattered pages, gathering them carefully, aligning the corners with a precision that suggested respect rather than obligation. The intern froze for a second as if unsure how to respond, her hands hovering awkwardly. "I am sorry," she said quickly, voice tight, expecting correction, expecting distance. But he only shook his head once, small and easy. "It happens," he replied, his tone the same as before, steady, unforced, as if mistakes did not require judgment, only presence. And he handed the stack back to her without lingering, without offering advice, without turning it into a moment about himself. And then he stood, adjusted the handle of his cart, and moved on, leaving nothing behind except the absence of tension that had filled the space seconds earlier. Victoria felt it again, that same subtle shift, not dramatic, not disruptive, just enough to register, and she realized something she had not needed to articulate before, that everything in her world required energy to maintain, authority to enforce, pressure to sustain. But whatever that man carried, it did not demand anything from the room. It changed it anyway, and that was not something she could quantify, not something she could command. And yet she found herself lowering the report in her hand, her attention no longer on the numbers she already understood, but on the quiet echo of a simple action that should not have mattered, and somehow did. The evening settled slowly over the building, the kind of quiet that did not come from silence but from exhaustion, from 100 decisions already made and 100 more waiting for tomorrow. And Victoria remained in her office longer than usual, not because she had more work, but because something in her rhythm had shifted just enough to feel unfamiliar. Her desk still perfectly arranged, her schedule still intact, yet her attention drifting in small, uncharacteristic pauses like a system, encountering a variable it could not immediately process. And when she finally stood, the city outside had softened into amber lights and long reflections stretching across glass, the kind of view most people would stop to admire. But she had learned long ago not to linger on things that did not move her forward, and yet tonight, she did, just for a second, just long enough to notice the faint reflection of her own stillness in the window, down below, in the quieter parts of the building where the executive floors gave way to maintenance corridors and service elevators. The pace changed, less performance, more reality, and Elijah Carter moved through it the same way he had all day, steady, deliberate, pushing his cart with one hand while the other held a small folded note he checked from time to time. Not a schedule, not a list of tasks, but something written in a child's uneven handwriting, the edges worn from being opened more than once. And every now and then he would glance at it and smile just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice unless they were looking for it, which no one ever was. When the service elevator opened on the ground floor, he stepped out into the cooler air of the evening. The city louder here, less filtered, car horns in the distance, footsteps uneven on the sidewalk, life moving without coordination. And across the street, parked just outside, a small diner with a flickering neon sign. A young boy sat in the back seat of an older sedan, his sneakers pressed against the edge of the seat, a notebook open on his lap, pencil moving slowly as if each word required effort. Elijah approached without hurry, tapping lightly on the window, and the boy looked up immediately, face brightening in a way that did not need explanation. "You are late," the boy said, not accusing, just stating a fact, and Elijah nodded once, opening the car door. Had to finish something, he replied, voiced the same calm tone that seemed to follow him everywhere, and he slid into the front seat, turning slightly so he could see the notebook. What are we working on today? He asked, and the boy held it up. Numbers uneven across the page, a math problem half solved, half guessed. Elijah leaned in just enough to read it, then sat back, not correcting, not rushing, just present. Walk me through it, he said, and the boy began, slow at first, then more certain, explaining each step like it mattered, like being heard was part of the answer. And Elijah listened, really listened, nodding once in a while, not interrupting, not taking over, until the boy reached the end and looked up for confirmation, and Elijah smiled, small and steady. You got there, he said, and it was not praise, not exaggeration, just recognition, and for a moment, nothing else existed in that space, not the city, not the building across the street, not the world Victoria Hale had built above them, just a father and a son, sharing something simple that did not require power to exist, only time, only presence, and from the far side of the street, unseen behind the tinted glass of a black car waiting at the curb, Victoria watched without realizing she had stopped watching everything else. Victoria did not remember telling her driver to wait, and yet the car remained idling at the curb, engine low and steady, as if it understood something she had not yet named, and she sat there longer than necessary, eyes fixed across the street where the moment continued without her, where Elijah Carter leaned back in his seat and listened to his son finish explaining a problem that would not appear in any report she had ever signed. And there was something in the way he listened that unsettled her more than any challenge in a boardroom ever had, because it was not strategic, it was not efficient, it did not aim toward an outcome beyond what was already happening. It simply existed, complete in itself, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had been part of something that did not require control to feel meaningful. Her phone lit up beside her, a series of notifications stacking one after another, messages from executives confirming implementation, numbers adjusting. In real time, the consequences of her decision already unfolding exactly as planned, and she glanced at the screen, then turned it face down without responding, a small act that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else but felt strangely deliberate to her, like stepping outside a line she had drawn for herself years ago. Across the street, Elijah closed the notebook and handed it back, and his son grinned, swinging his legs slightly as if the weight of the problem had lifted, not because it had been solved perfectly, but because someone had taken the time to see him through it, and Elijah reached over, tapping the edge of the notebook lightly. Tomorrow we try it again, he said, not as a demand but as a promise, and the boy nodded, satisfied, leaning back into the seat with a quiet ease that did not need anything more. Victoria watched the exchange with a focus she usually reserved for negotiations, as if there were something hidden in it she needed to understand, but there was no complexity to dissect, no leverage to identify, only a simplicity that made her feel, for a brief moment, out of place in her own life. A car passed between them, breaking her view for a second, and when it cleared, Elijah was already stepping out, walking around to open the back door for his son, the gesture automatic, unannounced, the kind of movement that came from habit rather than intention, and the boy hopped out, adjusting his backpack before looking up at him, saying something too soft to hear from across the street. And Elijah responded with a nod, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder, not holding, not guiding, just there, and then they moved together toward the diner, disappearing beneath the flicker of the neon sign. Victoria exhaled slowly, though she had not realized she had been holding her breath, and for a second, she remained still, the city moving around her, the system she controlled continuing without interruption, and yet something in her perspective had shifted, not dramatically, not enough to disrupt her world, but enough to introduce a question she had never needed to ask, and as she reached for her phone again, she paused, her reflection faint in the darkened window, composed, controlled, exactly as it had always been, but behind it, something quieter had begun to take shape, something she could not command, could not schedule, could not sign into existence, and for the first time, she did not immediately push it away. The next morning arrived without ceremony, the city already in motion before the sun fully settled between the buildings, And Victoria Hale stepped out of her car with the same precision she carried into every day. Heels steady, posture exact, expression composed into something that revealed nothing and required nothing in return. Yet beneath that surface there was a faint disruption, not visible, not measurable, but present in the slight pause before she entered the building, as if some part of her was still standing across the street from the night before, watching something she had not yet finished understanding. Inside, the lobby moved with its usual rhythm, polished floors reflecting quick footsteps, voices low and controlled, everything aligned with the expectations she had enforced over years of consistency. And as she crossed the space, people adjusted subtly, a glance here, a shift there, the invisible current of authority moving ahead of her. But today, she noticed it more clearly, the way people reacted before she spoke, the way presence alone dictated behavior. And it felt, for the first time, slightly distant, like observing a system she no longer fully inhabited. She reached the elevator, pressed the button, and waited, the silence around her filled not with stillness but with anticipation, until the doors opened and she stepped inside, alone again, the mirrored walls reflecting her from every angle, controlled, deliberate, unchanged. And yet she found herself remembering a different kind of stillness, one that did not echo, one that did not reflect anything back except what was already there. The doors opened to her floor, and she moved through the corridor toward her office. But halfway there, she stopped, not abruptly, not enough to draw attention, just a slight deviation from the line she would normally follow. And instead of continuing forward, she turned, her steps redirecting toward a part of the building she rarely entered during the morning hours, the quieter corridors where operations ran without presentation, where things were done rather than discussed. Elijah Carter was already there, his cart positioned near the service hallway, his movements the same as always, steady, unhurried, as if time moved differently around him, and he did not look up immediately when she approached, not out of disregard, but because he was finishing what he had started, aligning a stack of supplies with careful attention, and only when he was done did he glance up, meeting her gaze with that same calm acknowledgement she had not been able to categorize the day before. "Morning," he said again, the word unchanged, carrying no weight beyond itself. And Victoria stood there for a moment longer than necessary, aware of the unfamiliarity of initiating something without a clear objective, aware of the absence of structure in what she was about to do. "You were here late last night," she said finally, her voice even, though the question behind it was not one she had prepared. And Elijah nodded once, not defensive, not surprised. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, then added after a small pause, "I usually am." And there was no explanation beyond that, no attempt to justify or expand, just a statement that existed as it was, and Victoria considered it, the simplicity of it, the lack of performance, and for a second, the space between them felt different from every other interaction she had in this building, not defined by hierarchy, not shaped by expectation, just two people standing in the same place without needing to prove anything. And she realized that whatever she had come here to understand, it was not something she could demand, not something she could accelerate. It would require something she had never needed before, something slower, something quieter, something she was not yet sure she knew how to hold on to. The conversation did not extend beyond that moment, and yet it lingered long after Victoria walked away, not because of what was said, but because of what was not, the absence of effort, the absence of positioning, the absence of anything she could measure or influence. And as she returned to her office, the building resumed its familiar pattern around her, assistants stepping in with updates, screens lighting up with numbers that confirmed projections, voices aligning with expectations. Everything functioning exactly as it was designed to. And yet she found herself noticing the spaces between those moments, the pauses, the small hesitations in others that she had once interpreted as inefficiency, but now saw as something else, something closer to uncertainty, something human. By midday, a situation emerged that would normally have required her immediate control, a client escalation. Not dramatic, but significant enough to ripple through the upper levels, a contract misalignment that threatened to delay a major rollout. And the conference room filled quickly, executives presenting options, each solution layered with safeguards, contingencies, and language designed to contain risk, their voices steady but edged with the subtle urgency of needing her approval. And Victoria listened, hands resting lightly on the table, her gaze moving from one speaker to another, absorbing the structure of their thinking, the careful framing, the expectation that she would decide, that she would impose order on the situation the way she always had. But something slowed her, not visibly, not enough for anyone to question, just a slight delay between what she heard and what she would normally say next. And in that space, she remembered the way Elijah had stood that morning, finishing what he started before responding, not rushing to fill silence, not reacting to pressure, just present. And the memory was subtle but enough to shift her next move. "Give me a minute," she said, her voice calm, and the room stilled, not because of the words but because of the unfamiliar pause that followed them. And instead of issuing a directive, she asked a question, simple, direct, without framing. "What is the actual problem?" And for a second, no one answered, because the question cut through the layers they had built. And then, one of the executives spoke again, this time slower, less polished, more precise, identifying the core issue without the usual protective language. And as he did, the room adjusted, the conversation narrowing, focusing, becoming something clearer, something closer to truth than presentation. Victoria listened, not interrupting, not steering, allowing the process to unfold without imposing herself on it. And within minutes, the solution revealed itself, not through authority but through clarity. And when she finally spoke, her decision was simple, almost understated. "Then fix that," she said. And it was enough, because it addressed what mattered rather than what looked controlled. The meeting ended without the usual tension, people moving out with a different kind of energy, less driven by pressure, more aligned with understanding. And as the room emptied, Victoria remained seated for a moment longer, her hands still, her thoughts not racing ahead to the next task, but resting briefly in what had just happened. And she recognized something she had not expected, that control had not been necessary in that moment. That presence had been enough, and it unsettled her in a way that was not uncomfortable but unfamiliar, like discovering a different way to move through a world she had already mastered. And somewhere in the building below, Elijah Carter continued his work, unaware that a quiet shift had just taken place far above him, one that did not change the structure of the company, not yet, but had begun to change the way its center held. The shift did not announce itself, and yet it continued, subtle and persistent, threading through Victoria's day in ways she could not immediately define. Not a loss of control, not a rejection of what she had built, but a quiet recalibration, like a system adjusting to a new input it had never accounted for. And by late afternoon, another situation surfaced, smaller on paper, but heavier in consequence. A mid-level manager requesting an exception to company policy, a scheduling conflict tied to a personal matter, something that would normally be denied without hesitation, not out of cruelty but out of consistency, because systems relied on rules, and rules did not bend for individual circumstances. The request was brought to her office with the usual framing, concise, justified, already leaning toward refusal, and Victoria read through it once, then again, noting the details, the timing, the implications. And for a moment her instinct aligned with what it had always been: enforce the rule, maintain the standard, keep the structure intact. But something slowed her again, not doubt, not indecision, just a pause long enough to see beyond the document in front of her, and she found herself asking a question she had never needed before, not about policy, not about risk, but about the person behind the request. "Where is he?" she asked, and the assistant blinked, slightly thrown by the deviation. "He is on the operations floor," she replied, and Victoria stood without another word, moving past the expectation that decisions were made from behind a desk, her steps measured but redirected, carrying her into a part of the building where she did not usually go for answers. The operations floor was louder, less controlled, conversations overlapping, movements less choreographed, and when she arrived, the space shifted in the familiar way, people straightening, voices lowering, attention narrowing toward her presence. But she did not engage with it, her focus moving until it found the man she was looking for, standing near a workstation, shoulders slightly tense, eyes flickering with the awareness that something had already been decided about him before he had the chance to explain it. and Victoria stopped a few feet away, not towering, not closing the distance completely, just enough to meet him where he stood. "Tell me," she said, her voice even, not demanding, not dismissive, just open in a way that felt unfamiliar even to her. And the man hesitated, then spoke, slower than he might have in a meeting, less polished, more direct, explaining the situation in simple terms, not arguing, not persuading, just stating what was real, and Victoria listened, fully, without interruption, without looking past him to the implications, just present in the moment the way she had seen Elijah be, and as he finished, there was a silence that followed, not tense, not expectant, just space. And in that space, she understood something clearly, that the rule existed to support the system, not to replace the judgment within it. And when she responded, her voice carried the same clarity. "Take the time," she said, and the man blinked, the tension in his posture releasing in a way that did not need acknowledgement. And she added, after a brief pause, "Make sure your team is covered, not as a condition, but as trust." And then she turned, leaving the moment where it belonged, not lingering to observe the effect, not needing to see the gratitude that followed, because that was not the point. As she walked back through the building, the structure around her remained intact, the rules still in place, the system still functioning, and yet something within it had shifted again, not weakening it, but grounding it in something she had not fully recognized before. And somewhere below, in a quieter corridor, Elijah Carter moved his cart forward, steady as ever, unaware that his way of being had begun to ripple through a world that had never needed to notice him until now. By the time evening settled in again, the building felt different in a way no report would ever capture, not in structure, not in performance, but in something quieter, something that lived between interactions, and Victoria moved through it with the same composed presence she had always carried. Yet now she noticed the subtle responses that followed her, not just the immediate adjustments of posture and tone, but the hesitation that came before people spoke, the way they measured themselves against what they believed she expected. And for the first time she wondered how much of what she had built depended on that tension, how much of it was sustained not by clarity but by pressure. She did not change direction consciously. She did not announce anything. She simply allowed the day to unfold with a different kind of attention, and it led her once again to the quieter parts of the building, the corridors where the pace slowed just enough to feel real, where the polish of the upper floors gave way to something more grounded. And she found him there without looking for him, Elijah Carter moving down the hallway with that same steady rhythm, pushing his cart as if it carried no weight at all, his focus on the task in front of him, not on who might pass by or what might be expected of him. This time, she did not stop at a distance. She stepped into his path, not blocking him, just present enough to be acknowledged. And when he looked up, there was that same calm recognition, unchanged, unaffected by the difference between them. "Long day," she said, not as a statement of authority, not as an observation meant to prompt a response, just words that existed on their own. And Elijah nodded once, resting his hand lightly on the cart handle. "They usually are," he replied, his tone steady, and there was no complaint in it, no weight beyond the truth of it. And for a moment, the conversation could have ended there, the same brief exchange repeated, contained, safe within its simplicity, but something in her held the space open a second longer. "How do you do that?" she asked, and the question came without preparation, without the usual framing she applied to everything else. And for the first time, there was a slight shift in his expression, not confusion, not hesitation, just a consideration of what she meant. "Do what?" he asked, and she exhaled lightly, aware of how imprecise her own words sounded. "Not rush," she said, "not react." And the hallway held the quiet around them. No one passing through, no interruption to break the moment, and Elijah looked at her for a second longer than before, not evaluating, not analyzing, just seeing. And then he answered in the same way he did everything else. Simply, "I learned that most things do not get better when you hurry them," he said, his voice low, even. "And people do not get clearer when you push them." And there was no emphasis, no attempt to make it land, just a statement that existed as it was, and something in it settled into her more deeply than she expected, not because it was new, but because it was true in a way she had never allowed herself to sit with. She nodded once, not out of agreement, not fully, but an acknowledgement, and Elijah gave a small nod in return, then continued on his way, the wheels of the cart rolling softly against the floor, leaving her standing there in a silence that did not feel empty, but full of something she had not yet named. And as she turned to walk back toward her office, her steps slower than before, she realized that for the first time in a long while, she was not thinking about what came next. She was still inside the moment that had just passed, and it did not feel like a delay. It felt like something she had been missing without knowing it. That night, the city moved the way it always did, steady and indifferent, lights stretching across the skyline like nothing had changed, like nothing ever did. And Victoria Hale stood alone in her office, the glass walls reflecting a version of her that had carried her this far, composed, controlled, defined by decisions that shaped outcomes long before anyone else could see them. And on her desk lay another document, another signature waiting, another decision that would move quietly through the lives of people she would never meet, the kind of decision she had made 1,000 times without pause, without hesitation, because that was what leadership required: clarity, speed, certainty. And she picked up the pen, holding it just above the page, the motion familiar, automatic, almost already complete before it began. But this time, something interrupted it, not externally, not a message, not a call, just a pause that came from within, subtle but undeniable. And in that pause, the day replayed itself not as events, but as moments. The intern on the lobby floor, the manager on the operations level, the quiet conversation in the hallway, and Elijah Carter moving through all of it without needing anything from it, without forcing anything to change, and yet everything around him shifting in small, almost invisible ways. And Victoria lowered the pen slightly, her gaze moving from the paper to the reflection in the glass. And for the first time, she saw not just what she had built, but what it required to sustain it, the constant pressure, the unspoken expectations, the invisible weight carried by everyone within it, including herself. She set the pen down, not with finality, not as a rejection, but as a decision to wait, something she had not allowed herself before. And the room did not collapse. Nothing broke. The system did not falter. It simply continued, steady, intact, as if it did not need her to push it forward every second. And she exhaled, the breath quiet but deeper than before, and walked to the window, looking out over the city not as something to control, but as something to observe, to understand in a way she had never considered. Somewhere below, far from the glass and steel, Elijah Carter stepped out of the building once more, the night air cooler now, carrying the faint sounds of the city settling into itself. And his son waited in the car, just as he had the night before, notebook open, pencil ready. And when Elijah reached him, he did not rush, did not check the time. He simply opened the door and sat down, turning toward the boy with the same presence he had carried all day. "Show me what you have," he said, and the boy smiled, eager, not because he needed to impress, but because he knew he would be seen. Above them, Victoria remained at the window a moment longer, her hands resting lightly against the glass, her reflection softer now, not changed completely, not undone, but altered in a way that did not require announcement. And when she finally turned back to her desk, she did not pick up the pen right away. She let the silence sit, let the space remain, and in that quiet, something settled into place, not a conclusion, not a transformation she could define, just an understanding that what she had built was not wrong, but it was not complete. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider that strength did not always come from holding everything in place. Sometimes it came from knowing when to stop, when to listen, when to be present without needing to control what happened next. And somewhere between the stillness of